Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. So in today's episode, we're going to do things just a little differently. Because today, there are no rules. You'll see exactly why when I get to it here in a second. But because there aren't any rules, I'm also going to change up the normal deck price as well. So in today's deck tech, we're going to be doing a $35 deck. Okay, technically it's not no rules, we are following some, including the overall deck cost. But again, today we are doing $35 instead of $50 for that total overall cost, which does include shipping, but not basic lands. Decks on this channel are built to be fun, inexpensive, and focused. If you want to learn more about what a focused commander deck is, check out this video here. On this deck tech, I'm going to take you through its strategy, the tactics, and how this deck wins. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCGplayer affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So the reason that I say that we're not following rules today is because of our commander. Today's deck is technically not a legal commander deck, and that's because our commander is Ink-Treader Nephilim. You'll notice that this creature technically isn't a legendary creature. Now, in my opinion, that's pretty absurd. Many people have argued for quite a while that all the Nephilim need to be errata to be legendary. In fact, the Nephilim are so well known that EDH Rec even uses their names as categories. Each of the Nephilims represents one of the 4-color pairs, and if you actually click into one of those 4-color combinations, you'll see it's Nephilim at the bottom. So just for today, or until Wizards comes to their senses, the Nephilim are legendary. Well, that is, at least in my book, so here we go. Ink-Treader Nephilim is a 3/3 legendary creature Nephilim that costs red, green, white, blue. It says whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, if that spell only targets Ink-Treader Nephilim, copy the spell for each other creature that spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So this affects not only us, but also our opponents. If anyone targets just Ink-Treader with an instant or sorcery spell, it's going to copy for every single creature on the board. Now our opponents probably don't have their decks built around this effect, but we definitely do. This commander can be an absolute powerhouse when it's built the right way. And yes, I did say commander because again, for this deck tech's purposes, it is legendary. So what's our strategy for this deck? We're going to cast cantrips that target to dig through our deck quickly. This commander is absolutely absurd with a 1-mana cantrip spell. Because again, when we target our commander with just that spell, we get to copy it for every single other creature on the board. So if there are 10 creatures on the board, we're going to be drawing 10 cards, and yes, for just 1 mana. And then how do we win with this deck? Well, we're going to use the size of our opponent's armies against them. Because we can essentially target every single creature on the board very easily, we can do some very powerful things. So we're going to win in a variety of ways, but I'm not going to spoil those until the end. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how we're going to win with it. So let's start off with tactic number 1, CMYK process. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, we've got Diligent Farmhand and Secure Tribe Elder, both of which we can sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. And then we've got 3 Great Ram spells on turn 2 with Farseek, Rampant Growth, and Edge of Autumn. Farseek is going to get us a Plains, Island, or Mountain into play tapped. And then both Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn can get us any basic land into play tapped. We're running 1 mana rock with Sphere of the Suns, which comes into play tapped and taps for any color 3 times. Next up, we've got 3 Ram spells that each cost 3 with Cultivate, Harrow, and Springbloom Druid. Cultivate's going to get us 1 basic into our hand and 1 into play tapped. Harrow makes us sacrifice a land, but we get 2 basics into play untapped. And then Springbloom Druid does the exact same thing, but those lands come into play tapped. Just being able to fix our mana, though, is crucial for this deck, so we're also running Renegade Map, Traveler's Amulet, and Wanderer's Twig. They won't ramp us, but if we sacrifice them, we get a basic land into our hand. But after we fixed our mana, ramped, and gotten our commander out, what do we do next? It's time for us to move on to tactic number 2, One for All. First up, we've got Crimson Wisp and Expedite, both of which pretty much do the exact same thing. They give target creature haste and they draw us a card. So again, if we just target our commander with this, we're affecting every single creature on the board. The more creatures that are in play, the more cards that we're going to be drawing. Now this is a very powerful effect, so of course we want a lot of redundancy. So we're also running Viridescent Wisp and Defiant Strike. On top of cantripping, each give target creature +1/+0. And then there's Cerulean Wisp, which is going to untap target creature and draw us a card. Now we kind of have to be careful when we cast this one because of other things that we'll mention later. But next up, we've got Bandage, which prevents the next 1 damage that will be dealt to target creature or player this turn and draws us a card. Now, as you might have noticed, some of these effects aren't very impactful. But that really doesn't matter. The important part is that they target 1 creature and they draw us a card. Being able to copy that for each creature on the board is an absurd effect. Next up, there's Leap, which on top of cantripping is going to give target creature flying. And then Shadow Rift is similar, it gives target creature shadow and then cantrips. Finally, we have some more 1-mana cantrips with Twisted Image, Fleeting Distraction, and Envious Wisp. Each of these can help save us from a lot of damage in the right situation. But again, the important part about these cards is that they cantrip for 1 mana. And you might have also noticed that each and every single one of these cards is an instant. That allows us to be very flexible with saving our mana and using them in the right situation. But there's only so many of those kinds of spells. So let's touch on some slightly less optimal ones in tactic number 3. I'll take it. First up, we've got Renegade Tactics, which is a sorcery and it says target creature can't block this turn, draw a card. Later in the game, this one can actually be pretty deadly in the right situation. Next up, there's Cloak of Feathers, which gives flying, and Slip Through Space, which gives unblockable. Now, giving every single creature flying might not be helpful, but making them unblockable will. And then sort of on the opposite end of that, there's Irresistible Prey, which says target creature must be blocked this turn if able. Again, it's not really the effect that matters so much, it's more so that it's a 1-mana cantrip. I mean, there's a reason Ancestral Recall is banned in our format. It's drawing 3 cards for 1 mana, and our cantrips can do even more than that. We've also got 2 delayed cantrips with Heal and Thermal Flux. The reason I say delayed is that we don't get to draw the card right away, we get to draw at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. But still, for just 1 mana, that's a very powerful effect. But drawing isn't the only thing that this deck can do. So let's see what else in tactic number 4, Massive Gains. Okay, so I lied a little bit. These first 2 cards can draw on top of pumping creatures. Aggressive Urge gives +1/+1 and Fist of Flame does much more than that. It says draw a card until end of turn, target creature gains trample and gets +1/+0 for each card you've drawn this turn. Let's walk through a little bit on how this exactly works. If we target Ink-Treader with Fist of Flame, it's going to make copies for each other creature. We can choose to stack those copies in any order that we please. So we can choose which creatures are targeted first and which creatures are targeted last. But the original spell that is actually targeting our commander will always happen last. In the case of Fist of Flame, we can essentially just choose which creatures get the biggest. If we're attacking our opponents, we're obviously going to choose our creatures last. And if one of our opponents is attacking another, we can make their creatures huge with this. This is something that can come out of nowhere, draw us a ton of cards, and kill very quickly. And keep in mind that this counts all the cards that we've drawn this turn, not just the ones that it draws. A somewhat similar card is Confront the Unknown. It says investigate, then target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each clue you control. So again, we can stack those copies in the most beneficial way to us. And while this doesn't draw us cards, it does give us clues to sacrifice if we need to. Finally, a pump spell that helps us in a different way is Moment of Triumph. Essentially, it's going to give all creatures +2/+2 until end of turn, and it's going to gain us 2 life for each creature. Pumping creatures and gaining us a ton of life for just 1 mana is a really good deal. And speaking of deals, let's move on to tactic number 5, Deal with it. First up, there's Glaring Spotlight, which can come in huge for this deck in multiple ways. It says creatures your opponents control with hexproof can be the targets of spells or abilities you control as though they didn't have hexproof. Then also by paying 3 and sacrificing it, creatures we control gain hexproof until end of turn or are unblockable this turn. So this allows us to target opponents' creatures that we otherwise couldn't target. And on top of that, it can protect our creatures too or help them get through. Next up, there's Nimbmagus Elemental, which might seem like a strange include, but this is actually a bomb in this deck. Nimbmagus says, exile an instant or sorcery spell you control, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Nimbmagus Elemental. Now, why this card is so good in this deck might not be that obvious. When any player targets Ink-Treader with an instant or sorcery that just targets Ink-Treader, it's going to copy for every single creature on the board. Now, although that initial player controls the original spell, we actually control the copies. Now, that doesn't mean that we can change the targets, they're still going to target every single creature that they can. But I did mention before that we can determine the stack for those copies though. And we can also use the Nimbmagus Elemental to exile any of those copies that we don't want. So let's touch on some examples really quick. Let's say that an opponent casts something bad like Swords to Plowshares targeting our commander. Unless we've got some other way to save our commander, we're going to lose it. But for each other copy of Swords to Plowshares, we can either choose to keep it or we can choose to exile it. We've also got some spells in this deck that aren't necessarily the best for our creatures either. So with Nimbmagus, we can get rid of all the spells that target our creatures, including the original. And then we can let all those copies that target our opponent's creatures resolve. Finally, with this kind of a deck, we need to make sure that we don't mill ourselves, so we're also running Felden's Cane. It just costs 1 and we can tap and exile it to shuffle our graveyard into our library. Again, with how fast we can draw cards, we can run out of them very quickly. But again, outside of something like Nimbmagus, we've got other ways to protect creatures too. So let's go through those ways in tactic number 6, Stay Here. First up, we've got 3 ways to give target creature indestructible with Withstand Death, Ajani's Presence, and Ephemeral Shields. Again, just by targeting Ink-Treader, it's going to target every single other creature. Now this will help save our opponent's creatures too, but that's actually a good thing for this deck. Again, the more creatures are on the board, the better our deck gets, so we want to keep them there. An even better version of these comes with Sheltering Light, which says target creature gains indestructible until end of turn, scry 1. So on top of saving every creature, it's also going to let us scry a ton. Now there are some situations where we just want to protect our own creatures and not our opponents, so we've got some cards for that. Next up, we've got a way to just pump and protect our creatures with Blossoming Defense. It says target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Since those copies can't target our opponent's creatures, this will only affect ours. So we're also running God's Willing and Shelter, which are going to give our creatures protection from the color of our choice until end of turn. On top of that, God's Willing is going to scry and Shelter is going to draw us cards. Finally, there's Verdant Rebirth, which says, until end of turn, target creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to its owner's hand, draw a card. Again, cantrips that can be useful in multiple ways can be very effective for this deck. But although we want our opponent's creatures to stay on the board, we don't want them to hit us. So let's go through some ways to protect ourselves in tactic number 7, Stay Down. First up, there's Dazzling Reflection, which says you gain life equal to target creature's power. The next time that creature would deal damage this turn, prevent that damage. So basically, this can be a fog and gain us an absurd amount of life. Whatever the total power on the board is, that's how much life we're gaining. Next up there's Pressure Point, which is going to tap target creature and draw us a card. And then we've got Take Into Custody and Rush of Ice, which are going to tap target creature and it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So these are both great ways to actually protect ourselves for at least a little bit. And actually, Rush of Ice can be a win condition too. When we're casting it for its awaken cost, it actually copies that wave for every single creature on the board. That means for each creature we're tapping down, we're putting 3 counters on a land and it gets haste. With that, we can easily swing out and finish everyone off in one blow. And finally, we've got Press for Answers and Grip of the Royal, which do the exact same thing. They tap target creature and it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. On top of that, Press for Answers is going to investigate for each of those creatures, and Grip of the Royal will let us draw a card for each of those creatures. Now, all these spells are great and can really help us control the board, but there could be some times where things get a little out of hand. So when that happens, it's time for tactic number 8, Panic Button. First up, there's Into the Royal, which is going to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and if this spell was kicked, we draw a card. If we decide to target our commander with this, we're bouncing every single creature back to its owner's hand, but we can draw a ton of cards if we kicked it. Again, bouncing every single creature isn't usually what we want to do, but sometimes we might not have a choice. Next up, there's CMYK Charm, which is an extremely flexible card for this deck. It says choose 1, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn, or permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn, or return target creature to its owner's hand. So this can pump creatures, save our creatures, or bounce everything if we need to. And finally, there's Dawn Charm, which also has 3 modes. It says choose 1, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn, regenerate target creature, or counter target spell that targets you. So this can either be a fog, it can regenerate all creatures, or this can counter a spell that targets us. This deck works best when our opponents have creatures out. Now, most of the time we can depend on that happening, but if they're not completely playing along, it's time for us to take things into our own hands. So let's move on to tactic number 9, build your own army. First up, we've got Spawning Breath and Make Mischief, which are very similar cards. Both deal 1 damage to our creature or player, and they create a token when they do so. Spawning Breath creates Eldrazi Spawn, and Make Mischief makes Devils. Again, with either of these, by targeting our commander for each creature on the field, we get a token. Essentially, we're just going to be doubling up the number of creatures in play. And these can work especially well with our pump spells. And these still somewhat depend on our opponents having a few creatures in play to be effective. But a card that doesn't is Ayula's Influence. It says discard a land card, create a 2/2 green bear creature token. Again, for each land that we discard and bear that we create, we're going to be drawing more and more cards when we cast our cantrips. We can utilize those dead lands in our hand and turn them into something very powerful. And although this card can be great in this deck, it's not quite as good as our Golden Pig. The Golden Pig is going to be our number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Silver Fur Partisan. It's a 2/2 wolf warrior with trample that costs 2 and a green. It says whenever a wolf or werewolf you control becomes a target of an instant or sorcery spell, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. This card can get out of hand in no time in this deck. It's essentially a create your own army on a creature. Let's give an example to start things off. We cast a 1-mana cantrip targeting our commander, so that's going to target all creatures. Silver Fur Partisan is targeted, so it creates a token. We cast another 1-mana spell which targets Silver Fur Partisan and the token. So then we get 2 more tokens. We cast another one which targets all of them, and we get 4 more. Essentially, every single time a player casts a spell that targets our commander, it's going to double up all the wolves that we control. With this deck especially, this can get out of hand in no time. The more wolves that we have, the more cards that we can draw, and the bigger we can make our wolves to swing through. This card can fuel the deck on its own, and it can be a win condition, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. Now, a card that works really well with any of these token generators, though, is Enter the Unknown. It says target creature you control explores, and you may play an additional land this turn. Essentially, once we're set up, this is an absurd ramp spell. Basically, if we have 10 creatures on the board, we can play 10 extra lands that turn. It's not going to be hard for us to win from that position. But how else are we going to win with this deck? So it's time for us to go through tactic number 10, Mercenaries for Hire. First up, there's Kari Zev's Expertise. This deck is essentially a 3-mana insurrection with a ton of extra value added on. It's going to gain control of all creatures, untap them, and give them haste until the end of the turn. And on top of that, for all those creatures, we can cast a card with converted mana cost of 2 or less from our hand without paying its cost. The vast majority of cards in this deck cost 2 or less. Next up, there's Catch and Release. Catch says gain control of target permanent until end of turn, untap it gains haste until end of turn. Release says each player sacrifices an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, a land, and a planeswalker. This is a flexible card that can help us out in multiple ways. If an opponent has a pesky artifact or enchantment and we need to take it away from them for a turn, we can. But mainly we're just going to use Catch as a 3-mana insurrection. By targeting our commander, we gain control of all creatures and swing out from there. This card can actually be a very mean card if we want it to be as well. If we cast both halves and target our commander, essentially every single player is going to have to sacrifice their entire boards. Because when we have this spell copy, both halves are going to copy. Now we can actually win from this position if we have something like Ayula's Influence in play. But still, blowing up everyone's boards might not make you too many friends. Another way for us to win, which can be pretty hard to stop, is Word of Seizing. It says untap target permanent and gain control of it until end of turn. It gains haste until end of turn, and this has split second. So essentially, we get everyone's creatures and there's nothing you can do about it. Next up, there's Supplant Form, which basically bounces everyone's creatures back to their hands, and then we get a copy of every single one of those creatures. Because this is an instant, we can do it right before our turn and really take over the game. And finally, a very simple way for us to win is with Psychosis Crawler. It says whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. Again, this deck excels at drawing a huge amount of cards at an incredible rate. With this in play and enough creatures on the board, it only takes a few cantrips to drain everyone out. Just a quick note before I move on. Again, just remember that Ink-Treader Nephilim isn't technically a legendary creature. Even though in my opinion I think it should be, until Wizards actually erratas it, technically it's not. Now you can still choose to play with this as your commander as long as those that you're playing with are okay with that. I actually asked my play group if they are okay with it ahead of time, and they said they were 100% fine, so I went ahead and bought the deck. Just make sure that you have that discussion ahead of time. You should not be going in with the expectation that everyone allows this. But I do encourage you to write to your local Wizards representative to errata these cards. So free the Nephilim and let's move on. But now that we've gone through the spells in this deck, let's go on to the mana base. First up, we've got Command Tower, which can tap for any of our colors, and Exotic Orchard, which can tap for any of our colors most of the time. Next up, there's Ash Barrens, which has basic land cycling for 1. And then we're running all 5 panoramas with Bant, Esper, Grixis, Jund, and Naya. Next up, we've got Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. And then we've got Warp Landscape, which can do the same if we pay 2 and tap and sacrifice it. Next up, there's Frozen Verge and Mirrored Landscape, which can each get us 2 lands into play tapped. Finally, we're going to be running 22 basic lands. 8 of those are going to be forest, 6 will be an island, 4 will be a mountain, and 4 will be a plains. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGplayer optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. Since EDH Rec really doesn't have any Nephilim decks, there's not really a price we can compare this to. But in my opinion, this deck is an absolute steal at $34.25. Again, why did I pick a $35 budget? I'm not sure. Why hasn't Wizards fixed the Nephilim yet? Again, Commander's Quarters decks are about to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades now to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, we're going to be putting in Forbidden Orchard by taking out a forest. Next up, let's add in Birds of Paradise by taking out Wanderer's Twig. And then we'll put in Chromatic Lantern by taking out Traveler's Amulet. Next up, let's add in Swiftfoot Boots by taking out Withstand Death. Next up, we're adding in Heat Shimmer by taking out Ayula's Influence. And finally, let's add in Rite of Application by taking out Moment of Triumph. And now it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what you think about this deck and what you think about the commander in general. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.